This lecture, we're going to look at the back end of the urinary system. So we finished with the nephrons. The nephrons are found inside of the medulla or the medullary pyramids, which are here. And then that, that waste goes into your calyx, into the renal pelvis, and then out through the ureter. So if we look at the contents of urine, our kidneys are responsible for filtering a lot of blood in a day. As you see there, up to 6 liters in a day, and you produce some urine to get rid of toxins or unneeded things or to balance that pH. So we need to release some things out of our body on a daily basis. If your urine is clear, that means you're healthy. That means you're hydrated. That's what we really shoot for on a daily basis. But if it's light yellow or even dark yellow, it doesn't mean that something is wrong. It just may mean that you're a little dehydrated. You don't have enough water in comparison to the solute level. And this is normal because that yellow color comes from the breakdown of hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is found on red blood cells. So red blood cells have a shelf life of usually around maybe 60 days. So they are constantly being made and destroyed in your body, along with other things being released out of your body. So you're always going to have a little bit of color, and it all depends on how much water you're intaking and how much water your body is releasing. If it's orange, red, or pink, that means you have blood in your urine, which isn't a great thing by any means. It could be kidney failure. It could be a bunch of things. It could be something that's happening inside of one of your medullary pyramids, and something definitely worth getting checked out. If you have protein in your blood, that means that you may have high blood pressure because there's so much force in the glomerulus that those proteins are supposed to stay in the blood, but they're being forced out. It could also mean that if it's a female and you may be pregnant, you may have more proteins in your urine as well. And that's because sometimes your blood pressure goes up, and other times different hormones that are released when you become pregnant makes that glomerulus a little bit more permeable, and some of those proteins are able to get through. And then diabetics, they would have higher glucose levels because they have more glucose in their blood. They're not storing it inside of their liver using insulin. So that glucose is going to get filtered out through the glomerulus, and a lot of it should be reabsorbed as it moves through the convoluted tubules, but there's only so much that it can take back, so some of it may be in your urine. Okay, if we leave the kidneys, we go into what's called the ureter, and that goes through. Well, it leaves through the renal hilum, which, remember, that's the indent area on the kidneys, and that moves down to the bladder through what's called peristalsis. That's that rhythmic motion, just like we see in the esophagus. So when you're sleeping at night and we're filtering blood, we need to move that filtrate into our bladder, and the one way to do that is peristalsis, because we don't have gravity working with us. And we need to move it because if we don't, and it sits in the kidneys, you have your increased chance of kidney stones. That's the exact reason why valves have to be present. We don't want backflow into the kidneys because you'll get kidney damage and kidney stones a lot faster. So we need that filtrate to move in one direction, and that is going from the kidneys down into the bladder. Okay, I'm going to link the video for kidney stones. They can be very, very painful, and there's a couple different ways to get rid of them, and the video kind of explains that. The one interesting way they can get rid of it is using a ureteroscope, and they go up into the ureter tube, and they can actually encapsulate it and pull it right back out. They also use ultrasound, or they can give you medication to try to dissolve them as well, and then pass them. Okay, your urinary bladder is made of transitional epithelial cells. Remember, transitional epithelial cells can go from square shaped to nice and flattened. So when your bladder is relaxed, those epithelial cells will be nice and boxy. And when it starts to stretch, they can actually become nice and flat because they need to take up more room. So that's that transitional epithelium. And for males, they run into a problem with their prostate gland, especially in the older ages. That's usually found right around the base of it. And if your prostate becomes larger, it will cause constriction of the urethra, so it'll be harder for urination to occur. So your bladder is able to hold a lot of urine, but you have what are called stretch receptors on it, which I'm just going to jump forward to this. So you have your stretch receptors, which are here. Right? And as that bladder starts to fill, it's going to shoot a signal into your nervous system, and that's going to go up to your pons. Your pons is part of the learning experience of potty training, actually. And that will work with your cerebrum to then come up with an idea of when or where the closest bathroom is. So those stretch receptors are constantly being stretched throughout the day. It's a matter of how stretched they become and how much that signal goes up to your brain. So if we look at, if we look at that, that bladder, so your stretch receptors would be here, right? As you start to fill, it's going to put pressure on the sphincters as well. So not only are your stretch receptors, stretching and sending a signal, you're also going to have pressure on your sphincters, and you have an internal and you have an external. Okay, here's your internal. Your external one is a little bit lower. And the external one you can kind of control. But the internal one you can't. And the internal one, it can respond to your parasympathetic division and your sympathetic division. In order to release a sphincter, your parasympathetic division has to kick in. So people that are very nervous, it's a condition called or being scared of public urination or urinating, in public places rather than at home. It's true because if they're scared or self-conscious or get very worried, that internal sphincter will not release. So they can actually just sit there waiting to go to the bathroom. And it's really the parasympathetic division that has to kick in to allow that sphincter to release. And then urination will happen after that. So it's all about relaxing, as they say. Okay. Last thing. So here's that prostate gland I was talking about before. Last thing is actually releasing that urine, which we call micturition. Micturition, you will get a signal to your brain when it starts to fill, when the bladder starts to fill at about 200 milliliters. Not that you need to know the numbers, but you may have had a time in your life where you had to go to the bathroom, then you were working on something else, and the feeling went away for a half hour, even an hour, and then that feeling kind of comes back. And that's because those stretch receptors are going to send a signal to your brain before it's really at max capacity, and then it will turn off. And then as those stretch receptors get stretched a little bit more, that signal will come back. And then sooner or later, there'll be so much pressure on those stretch receptors and that internal sphincter that you need to go find a bathroom. Okay. So hopefully that kind of helps in the whole process of finishing out getting urine to your bladder and how we get rid of it out of our system.